1991, and the Saudi monarchy was eternally grateful for what the United States had done. It had restabilized the Middle East.
The big spur was the Gulf War, and people seeing Bush Sr. and James Baker as the heroes of the Gulf War.
The bargain that was struck basically gave the United States preferred access to Saudi energy in return for protection against foreign foes. And when the requirement arose in 1990, the United States kept its end of the bargain, stepped forward and helped to defend the kingdom and then liberate Kuwait. And the result was that there was an enormous outburst of good feeling in both countries. Trade boomed, and the military relationship, of course, became stronger than ever before.
The Saudi people close to the Saudi royal family, as a kind of as a favor to their benefactors, Bush and Baker, encouraged private Saudi business people to invest in the Carlyle Group.
A lot of what I was doing was trying to convince Prince Fahd Abdullah, who I think was an Air Force general, but also he was the minister in charge of the offset program, that Carlyle would be a good financial advisor.
Carlyle managed this program for Saudi Arabia, which essentially was a program that encouraged investment from foreign countries into the kingdom, but the money that was made from those investments had to be reinvested. Some percentage of it had to be reinvested in the kingdom.
You'd say, Your Highness, look, we have access at a higher level to some of these companies who have offset obligations. We think will be helpful to you in getting that interest generated. Now, they're not going to go do something just because Jim Baker says, why don't you do this? Now, can he get a meeting? Yes. Can we go in and make a presentation to the right operating group, and if it makes sense, are they going to take it seriously? Yes. That's what Jim Baker can do.
So Carlyle was managing this program, which made them, in some ways, a gatekeeper to the investment community in Saudi Arabia. I mean, they knew where the money was coming from and where it was going to. So they had a very unique position in Saudi Arabia, and grew very close with the royal family, with the Bin Laden family, and they were able to really cozy up with the Saudis and get a lot of investments from there.
And this became a huge arena for corruption, because instead of just paying a bribe to somebody in the royal family, now you could set them up in business, and you could say, well, this business is part of our offset commitment to you that goes with this arms sale, and so we're going to take this son of this prince and create a little company for him that's going to be funded by Boeing. But all Boeing's doing is recycling the money out of the arms deals. They get $9 billion, they kick some of it back. So Carlyle, I think, was brought in to try to put some legitimacy on this process.
That was the foot in the door into Saudi Arabia. From there, they were able to expand their business in the kingdom through, they bought a company called Venel.
The Venel Corporation is sensitive. It took the company 5 years to win the contract with the Saudis, and the negative interest displayed by some in Congress and the media has made the company men less than enthusiastic about talking about the Saudi agreement.
We've been in business since 1931, and we've been in Saudi Arabia. We ran the Dhahran Air Base for 5 years for the U.S. government, and we've had technical services operations since 1944.
I was on the board of directors of Venel for about a year and a half. Carlyle really didn't own that company directly. It was acquired by BDM, which was a company that we owned or had a controlling interest in, which we'd acquired, as I say earlier, as I mentioned. And Venel, from what I could see as a director, and I say I was a director of this company for a year and a half, was simply in the business of providing advice and training to the Saudi National Guard.
These are Saudi Arabian recruits at the United States Naval Training Center in San Diego. Classes are conducted in English, but when the men drill, the commands are strictly in Arabic, and the marching style is British.
the Saudi National Guard's main purpose is to defend the Saudi monarchy against internal threats. So this wasn't the case of a U.S. company helping them protect themselves from Iran or another country. It was if there is a challenge to Saudi rule from the Saudi people, this U.S. company is going to help the Saudi National Guard put down that rebellion.
Bij een bomaanslag in de Saoedi-Arabische hoofdstad Riyadh zijn zeker 6 mensen gedood en tientallen raakten gewond. 5 van de slachtoffers zijn Amerikanen. Doelwit van de aanslag was een gebouw dat door Amerikaanse militairen wordt gebruikt om de Saoedische nationale garde te trainen.
As I recall, there were 4 deaths, and this was attributed to Saudis with connections to the Hezbollah movement backed by Iran.
Initially, there was talk that Iran might have been behind it. But since that time, there's been discussion that it was fundamentalists linked to the network now known as Al-Qaeda. And when you see the kind of litany of Al-Qaeda operations, every time there's a new terrorist attack, this will generally be included.
وكل من رضي بفعلهم وتابعهم في هذه الحرب الصليبية بالقتال معهم أو بتوفير القواعد والدعم الإداري أو بأي نوع من أنواع الدعم والمناصرة لهم ولو بالكلام لقتل المسلمين في العراق عليه أن يعلم أنه مرتد خارج عن الملة.
It was a very strategic decision because the people behind that bombing were well aware that United States companies were directly intertwined with the protection and sustenance of the Saudi regime.
It was an American presence. There's no question about that. It was an American presence in Saudi, and that's been part of the whole Bin Laden theme, is that you've got infidels on the Saudi soil, and I suspect that Vanel is an inviting target for those kinds of people.
I've spoken to people in the Pentagon and the services who think it was a huge blunder to keep so many U.S. forces in Saudi Arabia after the first Gulf War. That was just a provocation, that was just giving Osama bin Laden kind of a big billboard to use to recruit people, to say, see, the U.S. presence is not even hidden anymore. You know, they don't even have the decency to pretend that they're not the power behind the throne in Saudi Arabia.
Certain countries have been targets of the United States with regard to terrorism, yet the biggest country involved in terrorism is Saudi Arabia. They finance it, and we have treated them with kid gloves. We have treated them as if they're not involved in terrorism at all. Is that because of groups like Carlyle that have significant investments with Saudi Arabian interests? Is that because George W. Bush's father is in fact part of the Carlyle Group and is close to the bin Laden family? And that is why we asked George W. Bush to have his father remove himself from the Carlyle Group, because it presents a conflict of interest, or at least the appearance of a conflict of interest.
I believe the Carlyle people, at least when I was there, and I know in my own situation, we spent an awful lot of time thinking about that and worrying about
Thinking about what?
About the appearances of things. About how something we do might be perceived, and whether we care or not about it. Yeah. And honestly, we simply believe that we had something to offer to the Saudis and the Kuwaitis and to other people with whom we invested in, and that people quite legitimately had built up a portfolio of friends and acquaintances and business experience and knowledge of how to deal in high pressure situations, the tendencies of people, what they might do. We think that's a good thing.
Son is the sitting president of the United States, interacting with the same countries and ruling elites that you and your company are interacting with, it's pretty apparent that there's a conflict issue here. And the problem is, very few people in this country are talking about this. No one really wants to go there. There have been a few sporadic news stories about Carlyle, and there have been a few skunks at the garden party, like myself, talking about the former president. But generally speaking, the glare of publicity and the spotlight of public attention has not been put on former President Bush or his son about this problem.
If the American people knew all the connections between prominent Republicans and Democrats in our country, with Saudi Arabia, with all of these institutions that have been...
Personal relationships you're talking about.
Yeah, business and personal relationships with these institutions that have far more to do with funding and sustaining terrorism than Iraq does, George W. Bush would not be reelected in 2004.
This is George W. Bush.